In this video, I'm going to do a demo of cutting the chipboard. This is the .03 chipboard that's sold at KNK USA. First of all, I cut the chipboard down into smaller pieces because I don't typically cut very much at one time, especially for a demo. So I'm going to put this piece down here. This is a 6 by 12, and I'm just going to put it down onto the Zing mat. Oh, one thing I want to note first, make sure your mat is clean and very sticky. You may need to add another repositionable adhesive. You can add some Easy Tack to it, or I use Aleene's Tack It Over and Over, diluted down 50-50. And what that does, it gives you a much stickier surface, which is better for holding down difficult materials. So I'm going to go ahead and just push this down, and then I'm also going to tape it in the corners, because even though the mat is sticky, when it gets close to cutting near corners or sides, it's going to have a tendency to be pulling so hard that it could bring the material up off the mat, and that can ruin the cut. So just be sure and tape down the corners very, very well with masking tape or painter's tape. And then after you get the corners taped down, also go back over it with a brayer and make sure you have good adhesion between the chipboard and the mat all the way over the entire surface, just like that. Now you're ready to put it into the Zing. Okay, so I have the mat inserted into the Zing. The next step is to get the blade tip length set just right. And so what I recommend is taking your blade holder, and you want to hold the blade up next to a sheet of this chipboard, and make sure that you can just barely feel the blade tip past the thickness of the material. And you can go ahead and do some of the other testing if you want to, but I find that with chipboard, with thicker materials, it's pretty easy to tell if you have just the right blade length, because again, you can just barely feel that tip. And now that I'm ready to insert it into the Zing, for blade tip height, I like using a stack of 13. I find that 25 is a little too high, and I get the best force using 13. And of course, part of that's because the chipboard is much thicker than the cardstock you're cutting, so it already brings up that blade holder higher into the grip. So try using 13. Turn off the machine and slide the blade carriage so it's over the chipboard, and then lay that stack of 13 onto the chipboard. Drop the blade holder down, and then tighten that front screw nice and tight, and then remove the stack. Then you can turn on the machine, and you're ready to go ahead and set the origin. Okay, so I'm ready to do another test cut. I did my first one, but I forgot to turn the camera on, so I'm going to do it again. Before I begin, the settings that I'm using are a force of 140, a cut speed of 9. I'm going to use a blade offset of 0.75, which is what's recommended for the blue cap blade. And again, I'm using 1 pass. So let's go ahead and get that started. Alright, so I've moved my origin, I've moved it over to set my origin right in this little spot, and I'm going to draw another small test, or cut another small test circle. Okay, now then, to see if I got a clean cut, normally I'd be like lifting up the waist, but I have this taped down, so what I use, I have a little paper piercer here, and I love using that because that lets me just kind of pull up a shape to make sure that I got a clean cut. And as you can see, I got a beautiful cut of this little circle. So now then, let's actually cut a shape out. Let's cut out the shape of a heart. So I'm going to slide this back in. Okay, and then I made my cut. And again, I can use my little paper piercer, and you can see that a beautiful little heart. Okay, so now then let's try something else. Now what I want to try next is I want to reduce the cutting force down to 120. I'm going to use 2 passes. And the reason I'm doing that is if I were cutting something a little more complicated than just a simple heart or a simple circle, I may find that part of my shape doesn't cut out cleanly. And that's because the shape, the blade is working so hard to get through the chipboard, it may cut like 90% of it in the first pass, but not the other 10%. So one way to kind of guarantee you're going to get better shapes is to use 2 passes. So I'm just going to just reduce the force from 140 to 120 and increase and set the multi-cut at 2 passes. And note that if you're cutting something extremely complex, this is like at one level up from cutting a basic heart. If you were cutting something, let's say like a snowflake, in fact I did cut one out right here, this snowflake. If you're cutting something this complex, you may need to go down to a cut speed of about 8 so that it can work its way very slowly through something that intricate and it won't be forcing itself doing some of those really tight turns. So, okay, so it looks like it's done. And there you go. And now we have our little turkey ready for Thanksgiving. So I think that covers most of the subjects or most of the settings and stuff you need to know about cutting chipboard. Again, if you want a thicker look, just cut out 2 of these and then adhere them together. And oops, there we go in the camera. And then again, you know, if you're using much thicker chipboard, you're definitely going to have to slow down the speed. You'll definitely need to go down to an 8 or even possibly a 7 and be very patient as it works its way through those thicker materials. But for the 0.03 chipboard we sell at KNK USA, it cuts beautifully in 1 or 2 passes.